Take a network break. Help yourself to a virtual donut and join us for our weekly perusal of tech news. Our top story today, of course, is the HPE Juniper acquisition. We're also going to talk about some space networking and an amusing crypto fail. We're sponsored today by Palo Alto Networks. You can see how ZTNA 2.0, Cloud Secure Web Gateway, and SD-WAN deliver exceptional security and ROI. Palo Alto Networks has produced a virtual event where you can hear how the latest innovations in SASE can help your organization automate costly and complex IT operations with AI-powered digital experience management and connecting secure branch offices and the hybrid workforce with this SD-WAN, ZTNA 2.0, and Cloud Secure Web Gateway. Go to paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment or see the show notes for episode 462 to get that link. Just a reminder, we don't have a Tech Bites today, but just a reminder, we do have a Slack channel. If you'd like to join the conversation, it's free to sign up at packetpushers.net/community. And Greg, before we dive into HPE Juniper, we promise not to go as long as we did last week.
Yeah, we should apologize for that. But there was just a lot to talk about last week. I don't think we got any negative feedback. Did anybody sort of contact us and say you went too long or you were full of hot air or something? But if we are going too long, we do really try to aim to get the network break down to 30 minutes. But I think we'll go long again today, but not 60 minutes long. How's that? So you can get on with life sort of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so let's dive into the big story. HPE is acquiring Juniper Networks. It's an all-cash deal for $14 billion. HPE says the acquisition will increase the revenues from HPE's networking business from 18 to 31% and contribute more than 50% of HPE's operating income. HPE is planning to pay $40 a share to pick up Juniper, which is a 32% premium over Juniper share price before the acquisition news began to leak. Lots to talk about here because there is a lot going on.
Well, I think, first of all, this is probably the most significant infrastructure acquisition we've seen in a few years. Obviously, Broadcom buying VMware is a big deal, but that's just because it's a large transaction. It didn't actually change VMware.
Right.
And if you make, it wasn't VMware buying Nutanix to take out a competitor or, VMware buying Red Hat, the sort of thing. That's what this is sort of on that scale as. So I did want to focus on it, but for networking professionals or infrastructure professionals, I think this is a significant deal. So before I start, let me just throw out some negatives just to make you so you understand. It is worth noting, as the criticism I've seen from various technology analysts is that 50% of large acquisitions fail. This is a large acquisition, $14 billion spent by HPE. It's a straight up cash offer. There's no question that customers will be disrupted, and there's no question that customers won't like it, especially engineers who've spent a lot of time working on either Aruba or Juniper and feel like this is going to disrupt their career plans or efforts they made or whatever is not going to be thing.
It'll interfere with their favorite platforms one way or the other, yeah.
Yeah, well, engineers do end up putting a lot of effort into aligning with a specific vendor to speak its language and understand its technology. And so you sort of got to move through that, and I would encourage you to sort of keep an open mind. But I think the overall, if you want to have a very quick takeaway, HPE and Juniper weren't successful alone. Juniper's growth has been slow, even though they've got great technology. They're one of the first infrastructure companies to get into AI and successfully put AI in the form of Mist, or as they call it, mystifying everything, which is a nice marketing thing.
Yes.
HPE was sort of stuck. I think we've said a few times over the last 2 years that HPE is sort of a bit directionless, if that makes sense. It's doing very well. It's got its subscription revenue coming along, but that's a slow and steady thing. And I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing is that HPE knew that it needed to make a significant acquisition to make a difference. And I think that this is significant from that point of view. Keep in mind that Juniper is infrastructure, AI, and it certainly has a networking. It's attached to service providers. HPE has a bunch of enterprise customers, doesn't have telcos, or it's been struggling in the telco market. It's tried very hard to do private 5G. It's tried to get into telcos with various parts of the Aruba portfolio without much luck. It's done a whole bunch of things. So I think it's actually quite a good match, and it'll be interesting to see how it works out. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed to work out, but I do believe that the GreenLake subscription business is the core focus here. I believe that the whole idea that modern on-prem cloud stacks are really complicated. And I also think what we're seeing is off-prem cloud is also being seen as just hideously complex. Customers don't want to spend money on headcount to perform the integration. If you move to the cloud, you've got to go and DevOps everything, right? And that means tripling or quadrupling your IT headcount to be able to run cloud successfully, right? And you don't know what your costs are. I think there's definitely an emerging movement of people saying, I want on-prem because I need to know what my costs are. I can't have this uncontrolled consumption-based licensing. I can't negotiate with AWS. I can't manage my costs unless I hire, multiple headcount just to do cost tracking every day of the week. Constantly looking for savings and where money is being wasted. Sounds like a good idea until you're actually doing it and realize that you're spending a significant part of your budget just monitoring the cloud.
So you're saying HPE brings that hyperconverged infrastructure that you can deploy on-prem, consume it like cloud, and also in some ways with GreenLake, pay for it. You're not paying up front. It's more of a subscription model, which lets you manage your costs a little bit better based on actual consumption, because you can sort of buy the full capability of that server, but not pay for, if you're only using half the cores, you're only paying for half the cores essentially.
Yeah, that's right. And HPE gives you that blend between, AWS can charge you whatever it likes, for anything.
Yes.
And they can, jack up the price by 50%. And guess what? You're stuck. Whereas if you're running more towards the on-prem stuff, there's a blend here where you can start to say, yeah, well, maybe I want subscription, but maybe I want to turn it into something permanent. Maybe I have a mix of subscription and capital spending. There's a whole bunch of stuff that could go here. And I think that there's an emerging, now I'm not saying that this is here, but in the discussions I'm seeing and the people I'm talking to, there's definitely within the enterprise, or within large companies, they're saying, yeah, it would be great to move to the cloud. But the challenge is I have to do everything myself. I have to take a bit of this and a bit of this, and then I have to weld it together. I have to build but if I go and buy a GreenLake subscription, all of my infrastructure is built for me. I just have to, HPE is taking on a lot of that complexity.
Right.
And the challenge here is that HPE doesn't have a good networking story. So if you want to do multi-cloud networking, if you want to do data center networking, it's been trying to, either partner with Arista for a while, then it acquired Aruba, then it tried to run Aruba for a while. It bought Plexi for data center networking and kind of didn't make the best of that. That was back in the days of Meg Whitman and Leo Apotheker, who were both pretty hopeless at the whole running a technology company thing. so don't, and then let's take this point. Let's remember that HPE is very different now to where it was 5 or 10 years ago when it made dozens of acquisitions. Remember that time when it was sort of like every day we'd turn around and HPE had bought another company in storage or whatever, or
yes,
in data. That was all under Meg Whitman and Leo Apotheker. I think that's a different era. I don't see any signs that Antonio Neri has actually in that kind of capability. But I think the subscription business, for customers, is about, we don't want to be integrating HPE servers with Cisco routers and Arista switches and Checkpoint firewalls and Palo firewalls and EMC storage and this backup solution. I think they're very much wanting to say, I need all of that complexity to converge somehow. And I think that deal will be very attractive and that's where the growth comes from. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think there's definitely something to that. You and I both attended an online press event with Antonio Neri, the HPE CEO, and Rami Rahim, the Juniper CEO. And Antonio Neri said repeatedly, networking is now core to HPE. He sees it as a fundamental for them to deliver on their edge to cloud positioning, to deliver on this integrated bundle that customers just consume. So Juniper and its components will be, I think, in the long run, part of an integrated fabric that is offered to customers on a consumption-based model, as opposed to it's up to you to bolt everything together. That's definitely HPE's strategy here.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly viable. I think the days of self-integration, you buy one from here, you try and stitch it all together, is moving away from us. That's what off-prem cloud, that was the promise of off-prem cloud, was that it would all be done for you. And it turned out that it was actually worse, because you have to work out how to use the AWS API, and you have to spawn an instance, and then you have to monitor it, and then you have to put in a cost management solution. You didn't make it much. You got more flexibility, but you didn't actually get any cost control. You didn't improve operations. You ended up with more headcount, not less, so on and so forth. So I think that's, and I think the weakness in HPE's GreenLake's model is that they didn't have the networking. They didn't have the WAN, didn't have the, Aruba's been slow to get to SD-WAN. It's done a great job of getting it out there, the whole thing. But I think it's been a little bit slower to reach into SD-WAN and then add SASE than perhaps some of its competitors. Of course, it's got, market-leading wireless and branch and campus type of capabilities, but I think they're a little bit slow off the mark with what was rather obvious around SASE, even though they've got Silver Peak. But I don't think they did a good job of running with Silver Peak when they got it. I didn't see Aruba suddenly get good at SD-WAN, even though they had the best SD-WAN around at the time when they acquired it.
So you and I have come to this acquisition, that the sort of driving force behind this acquisition, from different perspectives. I'm thinking it was driven by AI, but you are taking the perspective you think there's more of a role for service provider and telcos in HPE's thinking here.
Yeah, I do. I really think that, well, obviously it's an AI deal. Obviously the Mist thing, right?
Right.
Right. Mist is going to be, and I think you're going to see a lot of public discussion around AI. It's about buying Juniper for its AI. But I think that's the way to pitch it to shareholders in generally, because everybody understands that you've got to have AI. Mm-hmm. And absolutely the Mist AI campus and wireless and branch solution has been amazing and is winning deals at a great rate. They're now running at a $1 billion run rate out of that business. They had 100% growth in Mist AI last year, right? That's amazing. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to believe that Mist can grow to be running on top of Apstra, running on top of service provider of Paragon, for example. But more importantly, it can be added to GreenLake and maybe Esmeralda in the future if they can invest in this far enough to improve the operation so that HPE gets to keep the cost down, right? Uh-huh. So if GreenLake's using Mist to keep the operational costs down, then their margin is better, but their product is also better than competitor. So yeah. I'm really interested to see how that goes. So I think you'll see a lot of this pitched as an AI deal, and okay, yeah, it is an AI deal, but I don't think that's the only reason or even the main reason here. My general belief is that HPE says as growth is not, it will come from the enterprise, and there'll be some synergies there. Obviously, HPE won't be putting its competitors like Cisco and Dell networking in to its customers. Do you know what I mean? Like they'll be able to go in and say, don't stop using that Cisco stuff. We'll replace that with Juniper stuff, and stop letting their competitors into their accounts. That's an angle, right? Uh-huh, uh-huh. What I think here is that there's a big growth here. Juniper's got massive credibility in the service provider and the mobile co market, and HPE's been trying to get into that market for a while. I think this is the unspoken growth. If you can start to bundle in a 5G POP, we've talked about 5G POPs. We talked about Juniper's RIC, its radio interface controllers, and how it wants to have IP over WDM in the 5G POP. So instead of running, dedicated circuits or, fiber optic out there and connecting it, they want to run IP over WDM out to the 5G POP. But you also need a lot of servers. You need a hyperconverged stack. You've got virtual networking instances, all of the software. Like you're talking hundreds of virtual machines running in a 5G POP to do all of the functions to go around the radio controllers, the software radios, user control, accounting, security, blah, 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 blah. Well, Juniper's got the telco security. It's got the optical stuff. It's got the silicon photonics business. I think this is a growth market here. HPE might actually be able to go out. So just to give you an example, Ericsson won a $15 billion 10-year deal with AT&T as the primary integrator. Ericsson is supplying its equipment, or at least some of it, but it's also selling Nokia's and HP's and Cisco's and Juniper's equipment all to AT&T. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of business I think that HPE wants, long-term, stable, business. And if like a 1.5
writing
billion
a big check right up front, yes.
Yeah. And all you've got to do is deliver it. Oh, that's great business, right? For a company like HPE, that's absolutely got to be growth, I think.
There's also synergies here in that with the OpenRAN movement, which is, sort of instead of you buying an integrated system from an expensive company like Nokia or Ericsson, you can use off-the-shelf components to put it together yourself. Juniper's been putting a lot of effort into this. And now with HPE on the compute and infrastructure side, they can, I think, maybe tell a little bit better story about delivering OpenRAN to provide telco and mobile services, perhaps a little cheaper than you would get from an integrated company like Ericsson or Nokia.
Yeah, I think so. I think the OpenRAN is becoming important to the telcos. They want to have openness in the systems because they've realized that having all of these software instances means that integrating them all becomes very complex. Uh-huh. And you want to have some flexibility. You want to be able to say, I don't like your RIC. I don't like your IP over WDM. I want to be able to swap this in and out. And I think OpenRAN gives them that. I don't think OpenRAN, the movement, becomes a thing like, it doesn't become the Linux of telcos. It might, but I think that's a long way away and that's hard to pick. But it may well define a bunch of open APIs and integrations between different modules in the 5G networks of the future. And that's where I see OpenRAN producing something.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting take to pull out this service provider telco driver. For me, that's I think, more of a back burner issue. I don't know how much energy HP is going to put into it, but it is an interesting take. I think they are more interested upfront in being able to tell an AI story, having this AI capability, whether they can actually take the AI infrastructure and the AI knowledge that Juniper has developed and port it over to other domains, like running their server infrastructure, their virtual infrastructure, the way Juniper's doing with wireless and wired campus infrastructure. That's a big lift. Still a lot of question marks there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, but you could throw $1 billion at Mist.
Yes,
Juniper just didn't have the cash, right?
Right.
They could throw a couple of $100 million at it, hire people, bring resources in, but HP is now in a position to say there's so much more market for us to address here.
Yes.
Let's spend big. Yeah. And
frankly, the other thing is they got it cheap. $14 billion is not a lot of money when we're talking about the potential upsides for them in terms of, they've essentially just doubled, their networking revenue. It's a higher margin business for them. It helps, soften any downturns they have in their server business. $14 billion, even though they're having to take out loans for it. I think they picked up Juniper cheap.
The financial analysts that I read the reports from Jefferies on this. So I was looking at Jefferies. They said that Juniper was fairly valued at $32, the pre-bid price. It's risen up to $40 as part of this deal, so 30% spike. That's a perfectly reasonable buyout price for this sort of acquisition. The question has always been, can Juniper execute? And I think most shareholders and most financial analysts would say Juniper hasn't demonstrated that they can grow rapidly in their current form. Of course, that's part of the thing. HPE and Juniper, if they get together, in theory, they get some synergies. It's not much. What are they saying? $250 million a year in back-end costs will be eliminated. That's not a great deal.
Right.
That's not really the thing. So they have to sell more product. You could argue that Juniper's never been very good at marketing or being able to sell, whereas I think HP is much better at marketing and much better at selling. Certainly it's got much more incumbent stuff.
Yeah, that was another point that Antonio Neri raised in that event we attended, where he said, we have a gigantic sales force. We have a huge footprint, including in markets in Europe and Asia where Juniper hasn't had a lot of success. We can turn that sales force over to selling Juniper gear and equipment. So again, that upside of being able to essentially add to their bottom line almost out of the gate.
Yeah, you can go into every one of your customers who's currently using Cisco or somebody else's networking technology, and then say, now's the time to replace all of that. I don't think Cisco will be too worried about that, but it's certainly a sales opportunity.
It is.
But I also see networking is going to be a primary differentiator versus Dell and IBM in the enterprise space, and also Cisco, right? Cisco hasn't been hugely successful with its UCS servers. It doesn't want to, be where customers are with UCS. It wants to sell a premium around its UCS product line. It hasn't been winning customers at a fantastic rate. Now that it's got networking that's best in class against Dell and IBM, they should be able to win more deals, especially around hyperconverged. Dell, of course, has its own networking products, and most of its networking gets sold in its hyperconverged bundles or its Apex bundles. But there's still a gap there where WAN and so forth, they go and partner with, Dell and IBM will go and partner with Cisco or Ericsson or Nokia to do that.
Right.
So it'll be interesting. I should also note that Juniper has actually been successful in acquiring companies. Obviously, Mist was a great acquisition. 128T, Apstra certainly worked out for them.
Did it though? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think it's moved the needle as much as they hoped it would, frankly.
No, I would give you that, but it didn't fail, right? It wasn't like Cisco's ACI. When they acquired
it didn't
Cisco
fall
ACI, that was going to change the world, and it kind of didn't.
Well, that's because, Cisco has a hype machine that Juniper doesn't. And in some ways, I guess that helped Juniper in that because they weren't able to hype it, they didn't fall in their face. I think, though, Apstra's presence in the fact that it can operate on pretty much any networking vendor's hardware gives HPE an in that it didn't have in the data center now, because they can roll up and say, oh, you're an Arista customer, we can run Apstra on top of that. So it is an opportunity that they didn't have before.
Yes, but it hasn't failed. I think the product's matured and starting to get traction. They have achieved some sales. I'm pretty sure that HP knows they're missing some deals, and this puts them in a place where they can take them, especially around the service providers, where they know when you get into service providers, they'll still have to share accounts with Ciena and Nokia for the DWDM. You might be buying some particular Ericsson hardware or radio tower gear.
Right.
But I think HPE can now start to say, well, we can take the master contract and sub that out. Right. And I think that's something that HP hasn't been able to do in the telco market. They've always been saying, we've got servers, you should buy our servers for the telco market. Or, we've got data management. You need data management, storage arrays, you should buy ours.
Right.
But if you're suddenly got Juniper under the hood, you can say to them, well, we're a telco company now. We understand your business. It's much more credible than it was before.
For sure. Yep. I think a big issue that we need to talk about is the product overlap, because obviously Aruba is HPE's networking giant, and Mist is Juniper's networking giant. And so when you own a wireless company and you buy another wireless product, that's potentially problematic. And I'm really curious to see how they square this.
Yeah, so they published, as part of their investor report, they published a graphic, and we'll make sure that goes into the show notes, and a link to the actual investors, because there's a lot to be gained from that. Obviously there's things going on here. It spells out 4 areas: edge networking, wide area networking, which is obviously also telco, wide area networking, cloud data center networking, and HPC AI interconnect. So still pushing AI internet networking is different. Keep in mind that HPE is an AI company through its acquisition of Cray Supercomputing. Remember that?
Yes.
And they have actually been doing a bunch in that space. We don't talk about it much here because it's kind of more in the high performance compute market, and it doesn't sort of overlap with enterprise infrastructure in any sort of a way. But they do have that as part of their existing portfolio. And of course, Juniper's part of the Ethernet Alliance, so you could claim that they're already AI Ethernet is ready. So they have something in that space that's reasonably credible. But I think there's a few things. If you're a customer and you're looking at it, I think, first of all, the deal won't close until late 2024, maybe 2025. Now, that the deal is expected to go through. There's no China. The operations in China are fairly limited, so they don't expect China to block it. And there's no competitive situation here. You can't really say that HPE and Juniper are competitors like Adobe and Figma are. Remember, they were just, Adobe was literally buying its competitor.
Right. There's not a lot of anti-competitive argument about this purchase, as opposed to, say, Cisco wanting to buy Juniper, for instance.
That probably wouldn't work at all. So that means that you've got about a year, plenty of time to listen to customers, to do some analysis, work out where the money is. Once you know that the deal's looking very highly likely, you can start to put together a team of people to start to do the analysis, work out where the money is. Now, keep in mind that for HPE, networking is an amazing business because networking has a 60% gross margin, whereas servers and storage is a very low margin business. We're talking down 30%, 20% gross margin. And that's because they don't add a lot of value, right? HPE basically rebadges Intel or AMD software. They don't make the hardware.
Right.
They just buy a bunch of components and then assemble them. So there's not a lot of gross margin to be had here. And the expectation is that Juniper's products with a much higher gross margin can certainly lift the total margin up. That's a big part of the deal. And so they will sit down and say, listen to customers, work out the numbers on which customers want what, and then make a decision. So I think they will have plans already, so you can go and ask them and try and see if you can get a sense. But if I had to pick it, I'd say Aruba moves to a mid-market model focused on campus branch. So a bit like Meraki. Does that make sense?
I guess I could see them positioning that way. I don't see Aruba being operated like Meraki. Meraki was all about it's easy. Aruba is not that at all.
Yeah. Maybe Mist goes to a Meraki model, goes to the mid-market, like externally managed?
Maybe. I could see you making that argument because the whole point of having this AI ops enabled capability is that it is easier to manage, but you also don't want to get that, mid-market lower price tag. So that's what I mean about there are tensions here. There are significant tensions that are not going to be easily resolved on how you position this for who. In the briefing again that we saw, Antonio Neri and Rami Rahim said, customers who are buying Aruba have different architectures than customers who are buying Mist. And I was like, I don't buy that at all. I think these things are just going to go head to head and they're going to have to referee this and figure it out. Yeah,
they're going to have to pick one or the other. My guess is, and you don't want to throw Aruba out.
They're definitely not going to just pick one. Or they're not throwing anything out. It's about how these two competitors are going to have to find ways to live together.
But I could see that you could move Aruba into the mid-market and pitch it against Meraki. That's a really Cisco Meraki's been a hugely successful business for them.
Mm-hmm.
They've managed to retain their presence in the mid-market and the SME market, via Meraki, where otherwise they would have been totally displaced. And I think Aruba would be best served moving down to that. Now, there is definite Aruba is a superior Wi-Fi tool. Its wireless technology is far superior, but you could move that technology into under Juniper's Mist for the enterprise category, and that would be fine because the value in Juniper's Wi-Fi portfolio is Mist, not the Wi-Fi, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
And then, of course, and ClearPass and all that stuff, all those fantastic tools that Arista, that Aruba's been able to compete against Cisco with and be quite successful against. So I think the enterprise, obviously, where HP's had a fairly weak story in the enterprise WAN. I think Aruba's SASE SD-WAN story, even though they're quite Silver Peak, was a little bit slow and running a bit behind its competitors. Whereas Juniper's now going to be able to say, well, we can sell you the big routers, we can sell you the firewalls and a security stack that's right at the highest end, because they sell their security portfolio to the telcos as well. And so I think we'll see a shift where Aruba, for the first time, says, I've actually got an enterprise class security portfolio, but that's Juniper product. So if you're going to go do Juniper, you need Juniper routers, Juniper SD-WAN, because I think all of that is very tightly integrated into the SASE model. And that makes sense. And that is one thing that we haven't touched on is this is the first time in 30 years that HPE has a firewall and a security portfolio. And
well, they had Tipping Point for a while, which was sort of I guess it was an IDS, but it was firewall-like.
Yeah, it wasn't a firewall, though. You couldn't put rules into it and say block traffic.
Yeah, I guess it was more IPS, yeah.
It was just IPS. You scan it.
Yeah.
And I remember having a massive argument with a senior exec at HPE at the time who contacted me to berate me for saying that it's not a firewall. I said, but do I have firewall rules in it? He went, well, no. I said, well, it's not a firewall, right? I don't route traffic through it, right? That's the definition of a firewall, right? And so I think that is a growth market for HPE. Instead of having to partner with Checkpoint or Fortinet or Palo, they could say, we're going to take Juniper Cisco and position that in all of our customers. Again, coming into this GreenLake subscription service, they don't have to bring in a third party. That profit doesn't go outside of the company. Over time, it won't happen overnight. And I think customers will still be given the choice. If you still want to build, go with your Palo firewalls, then that's what you'll do. Right. Absolutely fine. But I think HPE will be increasingly selling its own in-house product more and more and more. And then I think also Mist AI gets added to everything. Yeah, that's how I think the product stack will go. Like there's not a lot of overlaps, really.
Aside from the two wireless companies. I mean, there's also SD-WAN overlap because there's the 128 product that Juniper acquired, and then there's the Aruba, which was, who did they get? Silver Peak. They bought Silver Peak. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, contrary to what you said, I think Aruba actually did do a good job bringing Silver Peak in and pushing it out to the market. I think certainly much better than Juniper has done. If I were to make one prediction that I feel confident about, it's that Juniper's SD-WAN is probably going to quietly go away over time. In favor of Silver Peak.
You think so?
I do, yeah.
I think the 120. I think they'll definitely keep the 128T for the telco market because it scales better.
That could be. I guess they could carve it out. This is our telco one, and this is our enterprise one.
Yeah, but I think that's also confusing. There are advantages because the 128T doesn't hold as much state, and it doesn't do so much encapsulation, and so it scales a lot better. Whereas. So there is an overlap. This is what I'm saying. One way to do this is to move these into two different markets. Mm-hmm. You move one down market or up market and, say this is a mid-market solution. This is an enterprise. Well, all the flexibility, all the knobs, all the whatevers. Or maybe you do a different split and say, well, Aruba is what we do for the enterprise, but this is what we do for telcos. It could go a couple of different ways, perhaps.
The other overlap is switching. Aruba has their campus switches. They've also got some data center offerings. Obviously, they're not on the same par with Juniper in the data center, but in the campus, I could also see significant tensions here between selling Juniper and Aruba switches.
So I would look at what Extreme Networks done here. Do you remember how Extreme Networks acquired a whole bunch of the, back of the days when it was Cisco and the Seven Dwarfs,
right,
in the Ethernet switching market, and Extreme ended up buying, I think, 4 of them. Brocade and Cabletron and all those different assets that it acquired.
Yes. And
what it did was over I want to say a 5-year period, it converged the portfolios. It ended particular lines of hardware that were already dead ends sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then it put a management platform over the top so that you didn't really notice the difference in the hardware. And then as customers sort of reached the end of the life cycle of those products, they made what seems to be reasonably good decisions about which ones to end of life and which ones to keep. Certainly customers haven't abandoned
It was Avaya.
Okay.
They also got Avaya, and I think what they do is they have one physical design, but you can choose. Do you want the Extreme NOS or the Avaya NOS? And they call it a profile. So maybe the Juniper and HPE could go this route where it's one box, but you get to pick the NOS. I don't know. Again, that's a place where I'm not clear on how this shakes out.
Well, we know it's possible because Cisco does that. It has multiple NOSes at different markets.
That's the other thing. So, they could just decide to run with a variety of NOSes because, Cisco does it. Extreme does it. At some point, Arista maybe will have to do it if they keep acquiring other companies. So, it's definitely not unheard of to just be like, we're just running multiple NOSes and the customer can make their choice.
Yeah, I think that's probably one way to go. At the end, when you think about it, obviously Junos runs on the devices, especially with the custom silicon. I think we'll talk more about custom silicon a bit later on. I think there's some reasons to be concerned there. But I do agree with you that most of the campus switching and the data center switching runs on Broadcom or Marvell silicon.
Uh-huh.
So, and by and large, running both operating systems on today's silicon and motherboard, the operating, most of them are x86, it's all pretty normalized these days. It wouldn't be too hard to run both as long as it's profitable to run both.
Right.
And you would have to ask yourself, is it really profitable to do that over an extended period? And I'm not clear that would be. I think at some point you end up with a convergence, and you have to support two, operating systems. So you have to have engineers who know how to run Junos, and then operators that have to know how to run, Aruba CX or CXOS or, across that portfolio. Do you really want to have two support organizations and two TACs and two sets of developers? Does that make sense in the long term?
Right. And that's also the question that comes back around again to wireless as well, because they are going to have to run with that for a while before they can, if they want to, try to integrate these two platforms.
Yeah. And of course they will. That was the lesson, we learned from watching Extreme, is that they will run them. I don't think anybody who's running Aruba or Juniper today should worry. And there will be plenty of time, years, I would think, before the final decisions get made.
Yes.
And you will know where you are, just track it. Yeah.
Another phrase that got repeated in that event was thoughtfully and gradually. They're going to do this integration thoughtfully and gradually. So they're going to take their time. They're going to think about it. They're going to see what customers want. So there's not going to be a head-on collision out of the gate.
Well, and I just kept hearing don't go, don't read, all the things that you would expect him to say. You're not expecting him to say, yep, we know exactly.
Chaos. It's going to be total chaos. Let's just see what happens.
This is going in the bin. We know already that by the end of next year, this is gone. And we're going to do that. They don't know.
They don't know. And if they did, they're not going to say it anyway. Yeah.
No, they're not going to say it. What do you expect him to say?
Exactly.
That's like asking Elon Musk to make a promise on when self-driving will be available. He's going to tell you what you want to hear, right? It's just, that's his job, right? That's the job of the CEO, is to say the things like that. And that it's an exaggeration or a mistruth or, but that's what they're required to do. That's part of the job.
Yeah.
So let's just touch on geopolitics. We already hinted about it. There's generally, the analysts I've seen, low risk of failing the approval. There's not a lot of overlap in the competitive businesses, no exposure to China. So we don't see the competition authorities in Australia, the UK, Europe, and the US knocking this on the head. It's pretty much a done deal from everybody that I spoke to.
What about the reseller model? We've seen, Broadcom start to make waves with resellers. Do you anticipate anything similar here? My assumption would be they want everything to be nice and calm. They're not going to make any big changes out of the gate.
I've been negative on resellers for a while.
Oh, yeah.
But, Antonio Neri was, very upfront, very quick to reassure analysts that resellers remain a core focus. Uh-huh. But obviously Broadcom doesn't agree. And I think that ultimately we will see more vendors go directly to top customers, say top 500, top 250 globally, at least. I think the real secret here is that customers want it. Customers don't want to be dealing with resellers particularly. Some do, but mostly they don't. Most of the customers know as much as resellers, or they're hiring their engineers from the resellers who know exactly everything that, they have the same certifications or better certifications than the reseller. The vendors want the profits. So why am I, HPE has to give away 10% of the profit margin to a reseller. Right? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Why, right? At some point, somebody's going to wake up and say, why am I giving away that margin? That's what Broadcom's done. And I don't think anybody cares about what resellers want. Does that make sense? If the customers don't want it and the vendors don't want it.
Yeah, but if you're in the server business particularly, there's a huge mid-market that you kind of need resellers as an entry into that market because you kind of just do. And so I don't see HPE walking away from resellers in the way it seems like Broadcom might want to, or Broadcom just wants to focus on the most valuable resellers. I think HPE is correct in saying they are going to continue to nurture the reseller market.
It's just so much conflict of interest because resellers don't make enough money from professional services. They won't spend on training. They won't retain good staff. And at best, resellers always just look like a wart on the vendor's carcass. They find like a niche to exist in, but reseller companies don't last for very long before they eventually, struggle to make profits because there's not enough money in moving stuff from a warehouse to a customer. The margin's really tight. Even just funding cash flow is incredibly difficult for most resellers. If you want to work in a vertical niche, then that's okay. But protecting your niche from somebody coming in from somewhere else is incredibly difficult. I think increasingly you'll actually look more like Oracle and SAP for their service model. It'll all be HPE will be moving into GreenLake. Once HPE is delivering all those services via GreenLake, where's the role of a reseller, Drew? I don't understand what the reseller does here. If you're saying to HPE, I want more capacity, and HPE sends out a reseller engineer and they get it wrong because they don't have enough training or they're not retaining the best staff or there's not enough hours in the day or the reseller's not treating their people right, but HPE brand is being damaged, how long do you go on for that for before it wraps up?
Right. I guess I feel like you've been negative on resellers for years and they're still around, so...
Not so many of them. They're converging on just a couple of big ones, right?
Right. Yeah. I guess consolidation.
In the US, it's WWT pretty much. That's about the only one left. The ability of those companies to make money. I'm talking to more and more engineers who work to resellers, and they're going like, with VMware turning away, that's a whole bunch of revenue those guys aren't going to get. Do they survive if they're not selling VMware licenses?
Right.
So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that one. Yeah. I do think that ultimately resellers' relevance is going to have to be redefined somehow. And I don't know, especially if with subscriptions. If you're doing subscriptions and there's work to be done, it doesn't make sense for vendors not to just do it themselves. Look at what IBM's doing with Red Hat. How many Red Hat resellers are there out there? Or how many of them are being displaced by IBM saying, well, we own Red Hat, you should buy our professional services?
Yep. That's a good argument.
Yeah. And so eventually at some point the resellers just stop being profitable because there's not enough business out there for them. Yeah. And the whole market collapses, I think is my contention.
So let's just do our final takeaways because we've already spent a long time on this and we got a couple other things to cover. So final thoughts on this acquisition.
Financially, it's a good deal for HPE and Juniper shareholders. HPE didn't overpay, but Juniper didn't get overpaid. So Juniper shareholders get a fair exit. I think a lot of people have said, if you're a shareholder of Juniper, you'd be worrying about where Juniper was going to grow. You'd been interested in Mist and Apstra but the telco market was declining. Well, now Juniper's part of HPE. They got much wider exposure to the enterprise. I think Juniper can be much more successful getting its networking in and displacing some Cisco accounts, and that's going to be good overall. I think HPE should get more traction in the 5G telco pop market. There's certainly plenty of room here for the deal to go wrong. There's a lot of water to go under that bridge, if you want to use a metaphor.
Yep.
There are culture clashes between HPE. HPE tends to have, people who are very stuck in their ways, and you've got Aruba, which has got a proud networking heritage. They might fight back against the Juniper people.
Right.
But, Rami Rahim's coming in at the top. Remember when Aruba came in and said, we're HPE bought us, but we're not HPE. We're still Aruba Networks. Remember that?
I do remember that. Yes, and I wonder if there's some of that still, in the HPE body.
Yeah, and of course Juniper's going to come in. Potentially, they might end up with a bit of a swagger. Hey, we're the networking dudes. We're here to tell you how it's done, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean?
I can see lots of culture clashes, lots of ego clashes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and people who've been committed to it, taking their jobs way too seriously, could be overdone. So there's a culture clash there that's really got to get done, and there's going to have to be some really good leadership. Although, I think that they've got good leadership at the moment. I think Antonio Neri's done a great job of keeping HPE running. The share price is up 100% in the last 2 years, I want to say. It's been up quite a bit from memory. and they did really, really well through COVID. So this is really the time for HPE to be able to buy something. And this is actually a significant acquisition. It doesn't, so if you look at what Cisco, when it bought Splunk, Drew, all of the analysis I've read is like, well, Cisco bought a company that's got really high profit margins, but we don't see where the growth is. And I don't see where Splunk is going to integrate with the business, right? Splunk is not obviously an AI company. It's more of it's got a great business. It runs 40% net margins, makes money hand over fist. Customers can't get out because they're kind of locked in.
Yep.
Very Cisco style of business.
Yep.
This is not that. There are definite gaps. This is definitely a growth opportunity for HPE if they can pull it off.
Yes.
So I'm moderately positive. I'm not bursting with positivity, but I make sense. Does that make sense? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think we've outlined the potential dangers. We've outlined certainly the business and cultural risks of trying to integrate these two companies. But I am also moderately positive. I think there are great potential here. I think if Antonio Neri has a clear strategy and Rami Rahim can be smart about how they integrate all of these, all of the portfolio overlaps and all of the cultures, then they could potentially pull it off. There is significant growth potential here. The upsides are great. So I hope they do this, as they said, thoughtfully and gradually. So we'll see.
Yeah, and the things that they need to do here are well understood. Extreme's done it. In certain areas, Extreme's done it.
It has happened.
They can look at what Cisco's done with this, its positioning of products and, the Meraki versus the enterprise. You can run multiple product lines. I think the template, there's nothing new here that they need to achieve. They don't need to create a new business model.
Right.
They need to make their decisions and execute on them strongly and cleanly. Yeah. And that is a very questionable question.
Yeah. And just a shout out to folks at both companies who might be wondering about their jobs and going through some personal stress about where they're going to fit in the new organization, or sympathies, because we're talking about big companies merging, but there's also people involved. So just wanted to mention that this could be a tough time for folks. So just we're keeping it in mind, and we hope everything works out for you.
Yeah. Like I've always said, always keep your resume handy. Always have one eye on the door. Because it's either you choose or they choose.
That's
and
right.
You've got to be ready for both situations.
Your employer is not your family. Yes.
No.
As much as they tell you they are.
Yeah.
Quick break to tell you about our sponsor, Palo Alto Networks. You can see how ZTNA 2.0, Cloud Secure Gateway, and SD-WAN deliver exceptional security and ROI. 2024 is a year when companies will need to do more with less. As businesses grapple with economic uncertainty, it's more critical than ever to consolidate fragmented security and networking solutions in order to reduce operational complexity and costs. Palo Alto Networks has produced a virtual event so you can learn how the latest innovations in SASE can help your organization. You can do things like automate costly and complex IT operations with AI-powered digital experience management. You can connect and secure branch offices and the hybrid workforce with SD-WAN, ZTNA 2.0, and cloud secure gateways. And you can unlock better ROI through consolidation of point solutions with Prisma SASE. Go to paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment or see the show notes in episode 462 for the link. One more time, that's paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment. All right, two more quick stories before we wrap. First, Starlink says it has successfully sent and received SMS messages between unmodified phones on Earth using recently launched satellites. Starlink says the DTC or direct-to-text satellites use, quote, new custom silicon, phased array antennas, and advanced software, unquote, to overcome these significant challenges for unmodified phones to communicate with satellites. That includes the need to hand off transmissions among satellites and the low antenna gain and transmit power of cell phones. Starlink says it used 4G LTE spectrum from T-Mobile with T-Mobile's permission to run this test.
Yeah, so Starlink has to go around the world, sign up with a local telco to get a spectrum license. So it's not just a case of turning it on.
Right.
So in this case, they did a deal with T-Mobile in the US.
In the US.
So they were using only 4G LTE spectrum, so it's not 5G spectrum, which is kind of a thing. I would also note that even though it's tested today, it won't be available until late 2024 or even 2025. That's not a Musk promise, so there's some confidence that that's actually accurate, if you know what I mean.
I do.
I just want to point out that this is very limited bandwidth. This is text, right?
Yes.
So all of the satellite stuff that we're seeing, whether it's in low Earth orbit or high Earth orbit or geosynchronous orbit, all the satellite to mobile stuff is currently low bandwidth. And for Starlink, the first thing they're going to do is text, and it's not entirely clear whether they'll be able to do voice. They may be able to. So far, the only people who've been able to do voice are using geosynchronous satellites with huge antennas, like basketball pitch-sized antennas in space, right? And that is not something that Starlink can do, but Starlink is closer to the ground. So don't go around thinking that suddenly you're going to be streaming Netflix over your satellite. That is not likely in the foreseeable future to ever be a thing happen. So don't let your expectations get ahead of yourself here.
Right. But it is, I think, a neat capability for an unmodified phone, and it could be useful in emergency situations. And I will note that Apple announced emergency SMS satellite capability on iPhone 14 and iPhone 15 models back in 2023. So we know that handset makers are also interested in this. So I expect further development. But yeah, it's something that's not going to be available. And it is definitely not for streaming video on your phone from space.
Yes. And it also means that, Starlink has to launch another 2,500 satellites.
Yep.
To support this, right?
Yes.
This isn't, it's ready to go, turn it on. No, this is a massive, you've got to launch all those satellites into space with the new features enabled. This isn't going to come out in a hurry, and it will only come out country by country. And I think it'll come out obviously in the US first.
Yes. So. All right. Our last story is a surfing dog story about a Bitcoin PR stunt to try to get Bitcoin on the moon.
I thought you'd like this. I think I picked this one for you.
Thank you.
There is, of course, a meme around cryptocurrencies, around
going to the moon.
Everybody's got a cryptocurrency. Yes. They're all going to the moon. Somebody is a bit of a marketing exercise. I won't even mention their name because it's obviously such an idiot move. They loaded a piece of metal engraved with a private key to a crypto wallet, and they are sending it to the moon. And the idea was that at some point in the future, people could go and collect it, and they would be able to be the proud owners of a Bitcoin trove.
One Bitcoin, yes.
Yes, but no matter how hard I try, I still can't see why I would buy cryptocurrency. There are use cases for Bitcoin, particularly for money laundering and for transferring value offshore to get around government restrictions, and of course, just for sheer speculation. But I would prefer to buy my company stocks. I'd buy stock in, Juniper as a speculation, because that's a much better gamble, in my opinion, than any cryptocurrency. But what I do laugh about is they tried to get to the moon and they didn't make it, which I think is a very accurate metaphor for cryptocurrency.
I guess they had put this on an actual moon lander that was supposed to get to the moon, but there was some kind of leak or something. So the lander is not on the moon, and whoever launched this lander isn't really sure where it is anyway. So yeah, that is a good metaphor for crypto.
And whoever engraved the private key probably has it. So maybe not quite the stunt. I just wonder how they kept the privacy. Like, does nobody have that private key recorded somewhere?
Right.
That just seems a bit, do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. The issues all around.
Issues all around.
All right. Well, we went long again. Apologies. We just had a lot to talk about, but we promise to be shorter next week. We don't have a Tech Bites here, so if you're done, you can walk away. Greg, where can folks get more from you if they're interested in hearing from you online?
You can find me, of course, on Packet Pushers. I'm on Twitter at Ethereum Mine. I also did some stuff on, got some early thoughts out on LinkedIn. So I'll be hanging around LinkedIn for the next week or so.
Yeah.
Don't know if I'll be there for much longer, but there you go. We'll see how it works out.
I'm Drew Conroy Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM. I'm blogging at packetpushers.net and also put my stuff on LinkedIn if you want to connect there. We'd love to see you. Thanks to our sponsors, Palo Alto Networks. And of course, thanks to you for joining us for another long episode of Network Break. If you like the show, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or recommend it to a friend. Thanks for listening.